Okay, here's Mr. Travis, Tom Travis of HIEMA, State HIEMA.
Hello, I'm Tom Travis, the State Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, and also the head of the Governor and Mayor's Task Force to try to evaluate the risk at Pu'u geothermal venture and do what we can to mitigate that risk to help the people in the community as much as we can. It is in that latter job that I'd like to talk to you today. We have quenched 10 of 11 wells, and we are currently pumping fluid to plug the last well as we speak. Should have an idea of whether that's successful or not tonight. Once that step is taken, we will be in a much more solid state for having lava overflow the site. This is important because I think, as all of you know, lava is starting to intrude on the southern edge of the Pu'u geothermal venture site. It's not easy to predict where it's going to go and when it's going to get there. So it's important that we get what we can done now and continue on. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
We just left a viewpoint in Leilani Estates. It appears that there's a major fountaining event, seemingly no more than maybe a couple hundred meters from PGV.
I'm not sure if it's how many meters it is, but yes, that fountaining event has been going on. I've visited it 3 or 4 times, and it continues. I think you can verify this with people that know more of it later, but I think that fountaining event is the fissure that is producing most of the lava that's going to the ocean.
For those that may not be familiar with the term, can you explain what quenching the wells means?
Quenching the wells means filling them full of cold water so that the weight of the cold water sitting in the pipe, the long pipe, is sufficient that instead of hot water entering the bottom of the well, cold water exits the bottom of the well. Now, one thing I need to make very clear that last time I talked I did not, and that's that these wells have been shut in since this event started. What that means is on top of the well there's 2 very big valves that are shut and have trapped whatever is below that and there's no way for that to get out unless there's a breach in mechanical integrity. So that was the first step. Shut them in, be sure that what's below is not going to come out. The second step is fill the well full of cold water so that the pressure in the well is greater than the pressure coming out of the well is greater than the pressure going in. And the third step is to plug the wells. If we're basically completing the second step, and if time permits, we'll start the third step.
What kind of material would you use to plug the well with?
There's several things that have been proposed to plug the well. Well can be plugged with special types of mud that get very hot when they're when they are heated up, get very, very stiff and hard and can plug the well. You can plug the well with a plug, an iron plug, and there are probably many others. I'm not a drilling engineer, so I won't go much further into that. There's one more thing that it's important to say, and that's that the way this team has worked is there's about 6 of us or 7 of us on the team, and behind that team are the workers at PGV who have to go out and do all the things that the team decides has to be done. And those workers have worked very hard, very effectively, we're essentially all part of one team, and we're working to make that as good as we can.
What's the weight of the water that has been sent down some of these wells? I mean, if you're going on 6,000 feet, you have a 20-inch bore. Do you have any idea on that?
It doesn't matter what the bore is, it matters what the height is. And
Okay.
there's a conversion factor that's basically about a half a pound per foot. And that's not right, but it's the one I remember, and it's close. So essentially the pressure at the bottom of the well would be the number of feet deep it is divided by 2.
A follow up on that, the pressure valves you have on the top of the well, what are they rated to for like PSI resistance?
They're 1500. They're 1500 series steel, as I understand it. And I know this from hearsay. They're tested, and this is again me talking to people. I haven't reviewed the test documents. They're tested to over 3,000 pounds, and probably would be good to about 5,000 pounds. Now, having said that, that testing is done with metal at certain temperatures, and if you put tremendous heat on any metal, it changes how much pressure and stress that metal can hold. That's why having lava flow across a well causes some uncertainties that have to be dealt with.
And I take it when you say 3,000 to 5,000 pounds, you're talking about per square inch.
Yes.
Okay.
And then for the plugs, do you have that material on site already, or is it on its way, or for whatever kind of plug you decided to use?
The plugs will be on site tomorrow morning. I'm not sure if they're in Kona right now or if they're being flown into Kona right now, but they're going to be brought over from the west side by tomorrow morning. So we'll have the plugs on site tomorrow morning.
Would that be iron? Do you intend to use iron plugs? Is that right?
Yeah, they're metal plugs. They are made of, there are quite a number of materials in them, some of which is iron. But it's a metal plug, and there's other things in it. They have materials that on the edge of the plug allow it to seat more firmly inside the pipe. So there's other materials, but essentially they're metal plugs.
So you put water down both the injection wells and the production wells, is that right?
Don't have to put water down wells that are already at zero pressure or at a vacuum on the surface. That means they're already running in. So we essentially have put water down 4 wells at this point in order to reduce pressure. There's a 5th well that we put water down just to cool off the resource underneath.
As you guys have done your research for this, is there precedent for lava overruns at other geothermal facilities around the world?
I have researched this, and again, I'm not going to overstate my knowledge. I have found no case in which lava has overrun a well that has been shut down like these have been. There's been lava. We talked to scientists in Iceland. They have operated with wells that have been in lava fields, and they had some insights, but the circumstances were different. Essentially, what has to be decided is how different kinds of lava flow are going to put different kinds of stress on the wellhead, and try to estimate the amount of temperature effect that if the lava goes on the wellhead, what the high temperatures would do to the behavior of the metal of the well and the wellhead.
If there were an uncontrolled release, what would the risk be to the community? Just if you can explain sort of what might go wrong.
Well, we've had one uncontrolled risk at Pu'u geothermal venture, and so probably the best way to answer the question is say what happened during the blowout at KS8. Now, interesting, that's near a full blowout. It lasted 31 hours. But if we were going to talk about what happens if a wellhead got sheared off, the consequences of something like that would be probably far less than KS8. And the reason is because there would be impediments to flow out of the well. On KS8, you had an open hole to the ground. If you have impediments down well, or where the cracks or whatever occur at the top of the well would occur, those impediments would reduce the flow significantly. So there's a lot of things that would mitigate from a KS8 type. From a planning purpose, looking at KS8 would provide a good baseline to be sure that you're considering the things that need to be considered.
But just to be clear, so the risk is uncontrolled release of fluids and
there's a steam release. There's many chemicals, but primarily the critical factor would be hydrogen sulfide, a very deadly gas.
And then there was some mention of some difficulties at one well. Can you explain that in terms of plugging it or putting the fluid in?
Yes. What has happened on the surface, and you can go out there and see that the world on the surface has changed because of volcanic activity. That's happening underneath as well. And so when we started dealing with the wells, they didn't all behave as they had 2 weeks before. We had to look at each well and deal with it. Essentially, the well is KS14 is the one you're talking about. And KS14 seems to have access to a great amount of heat, more heat than it had when it was serving as a production well 2 or 3 weeks ago, before this event occurred.
Is that one closer to the existing flow on the property?
I don't know the answer to that, so I'm not going to speculate.
And what did that do to your process as you try to inject fluids into it?
What happens is we put cold fluids in it, and we were unable to get pressure to zero. And that meant that it was still heating up at the bottom to a degree. We put salt water in it, which is heavier, which should allow us to increase the pressure at the bottom. The salt water was of insufficient density to cause the well to shut off, and so now we are using mud materials that are used in drilling industry to plug the well while under pressure.
So essentially your water was boiling back at you?
Yeah.
Being converted into steam? And
Yeah, there's some more complications that I'm not going to go into because you guys would probably go to sleep. But yes, there were a lot of things happening down in that well that were different than what we thought they would be.
Anybody injured in the process?
Oh, no. There's been no one injured. And in fact, safety of the workers is important. And over about a day and a half, we've had to suspend work because of high SO2 concentrations. So no, safety of the workers is right at the top for when we're working there, just like when we do any emergency management.
Are your workers working with masks? Gas masks?
They have personal protective equipment available. When the winds are blowing like they are today, the air out there is actually nice. I've been out there for several hours in the last, and there's absolutely no need for use of any personal protective equipment.
As of the last report I heard, the lava encroaching onto the property was about, say, 200 to 300 meters away from anything that was considered developed on there, and there was a berm stopping it. Is that still the case at this point?
Yes, it hasn't moved, and but I'm going to let Dr. Jim tell you about all that stuff. I think he knows more about lava flow than I do.
Oh, before that, we'll ask Tom and Magno to come up and take over.
Okay.
Is that okay? Tom and
Good afternoon. Talmadge Magno with the Hawaii County Civil Defense. Activity continues at a high rate. A lot of lava out there. Still asking the folks to be cautious, be prepared, as lava can move around. We still got high gas content, so warning the people that are downrange of the vents to take necessary precautions. Let's see. Preparing for anything that comes out of PGV as far as possible impacts to that site and what it might mean if there's a H2S release, as far as messaging to the community and any evacuations that might have to take place. So that's part of all our preparation and messaging that's going on right now. Still 2 ocean entries. We still have the same, pretty much residents only into the impacted area, and continue planning and maintain 24-hour operations to monitor what's going on.
Ocean entry and the lava going towards PGV are all from fissure number 22 at this point?
Let's see. The 22 is going to PGV. 20 is the one that's putting out the flows towards the ocean, or the ocean entry.
Okay, they said 22 earlier this morning, which is why I'm asking.
But how are you guys getting the message out about the hydrogen sulfide, and what is the content of that message?
Well, all along we've been basically covering all hazards, and we haven't specifically mentioned hydrogen sulfide, but with this flow coming onto the PGV property, we'll start acknowledging that this is going to be the next precautions that folks are going to have to take.
So in your future audio.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. And we've discussed, amongst us, all the different, and you guys are aware of all the different messaging systems and products that we put out. So we'll utilize everything that we need to get the information out to the public out there. And we understand that there is some difficulties getting message out because of the connectivity out there. So, we still have a lot of officers, National Guard, county staff on the ground. So, we'll utilize them to get the message out. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Dr. Jim Hawaii Power, please.
Hi, I'm Jim Waikawa, U.S. Geological Survey, Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. And I'll first state that Tal and I haven't had a chance to talk. We just completed an overflight. It is Fissure 22 that's actually putting out all the lava. It's been a little bit confusing with fissures connecting and unconnecting, and it became fairly clear that this was Fissure 22. It's a short section of fissure that's actually fountaining lava up to 140 feet or so at times. And it is the one that's producing lava going into the ocean. The channel going down to the ocean is actually quite broad, but it is currently only feeding one of the ocean entries. There are 2 flows going to the coast, but only the eastern one is currently active. Pretty good sized plume coming out of the ocean entry, and there's a small delta being formed. This morning it was about 80 yards from the old coast to the new coast. There are a few fissures still active in the rift zone area. 6 has reactivated a couple of times and is feeding a fairly short flow right in the Leilani-Pohoiki intersection area. Fissure 19 and 17 are weekly spattering still. 17 has been active for quite a long time. Let's see. The ones I haven't mentioned are basically have stopped being active. They seem to be kind of intermittently coming and going, especially in the northeast section of this line of fissures. Let's see, at the summit, well, no, I'm sticking at the rift zone. The rift zone, the deformation around the rift zone, the amount of swelling and the number of earthquakes, all of that is diminishing. It continues to slow down, which is somewhat good news. The summit, we had an explosive eruption at about 1 a.m. this morning, eruption cloud up to 7,000 feet. We've had a number of small ash emissions, which have been unusually, had an unusual amount of ash in them. So that's it.
This being day 18 of the eruption, in terms of overall volume, is this the most impressive in terms of what we've seen, in terms of total activity?
I'd have to say no. It's this is still the early part of the eruption, especially this second phase, which are very fluid stuff. And usually in an eruption, the first 2 or 3 days, the eruption rate is quite high, and then it will tail off. So I think this was just a long sort of pre-eruption before we got to the really voluminous stuff. And we're still in the high rate. We don't really have a good idea of how to do that, but we have a UAS team here, drones basically, that are doing LiDAR of the area. And if they were able to kind of do LiDAR of the whole area, we should be able to get a pretty good volume estimate and answer that question better.
So, with the deformation, when you say it seems to be fairly good news, essentially you're not getting as much lava pumped in, or is it just because it's open?
It's stabilizing. Yeah, the Earth is elastic, more or less elastic, and so even if there was a big push and it stopped, the Earth around it would be accommodating that pressure for a while. So if it stopped, it might have stopped a day or two before this, but basically all the signs are that it stopped inflating. It stopped relaxing. It's happy at this point.
So when you look at Kilauea and you look at the history, is that common for it to settle like that? Has it been common for it to settle and then pick back up again, or is that normally sort of a precursor for just slowing down and ultimately stopping?
Nothing's for sure. This is a good sign of the present situation, but it's not doesn't necessarily mean that it won't pick up again. We're looking into that possibility. It's clearly a possibility, but we're looking at other intrusions that we've seen, much smaller, of course, than this one, and I don't recall right now where we are in that study, but whether there's a possibility of them picking up again or not, or is it related to size? So can't answer that right now.
All of the activity for the last week or so has been a little further down in the rift zone. There doesn't seem to be much seismic activity higher up towards Leilani. Do you see a much lower risk for Leilani at this point, or would you also say that Leilani still is in a high risk area?
I would say Leilani's, the fissure is established right now. The trend of the fissure is established, and it's not clear yet whether new fissures will open up or whether we'll have these fissures for a while or whether this will shut off. We know that the ground under Highway 130 that's in line with this fissure line is hot. It's still not producing sulfur dioxide, but it is hot. So, I think all the possibilities we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks are still on the table.
Can you talk a little bit about the fissure? I thought it was 22 that was closest to PGV, since there was talk of PGV. What's going on with that?
Sorry.
You had mentioned 22 is
Yes.
the main one.
Right now, yes.
Okay. I'm trying to think of where they are all in the line there. Is the 22, is that the one that's close to PGV?
They're all kind of right on a line at the southern boundary of what I think is the PGV property. And so, they're all pretty darn close. 22 is I think it's probably the one that's most directly south of the main generation area.
And was that the one that had a little bit more northerly flow to that one that had come close to PGV?
You mean what we were talking about before?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's the main actor at the moment.
All right.
And it's producing a small perched pond on its north side. Most of the lava is going south to the ocean entry, but there's a small perched pond on the north side that's being fed partially by spatter that kind of goes over the edge. There's also a line of very low fountains to the west of the main big 180-foot fountain, and that's also feeding this perch pond. The perch pond will keep building itself up as it overflows a bit, and each time it overflows, which is done about twice now, it's produced a very narrow flow that's gone out maybe a couple hundred feet before it solidifies, and the pond builds up again until another flow like that comes out. So we're keeping an eye on that over the next several hours in support of CD and Tom Travis's work.
So when it moves forward a couple hundred feet, is it essentially walking closer and closer to the? Sorry. When it moves forward by a couple hundred feet, it's essentially walking closer and closer to the developed well areas. Is that right?
No, the perch pond itself stays relatively fixed in its position, and so the flows themselves come out of the. They're basically small breaches of that rim. It's like an outdoor swimming pool that has little lapses right up at the surface, and so it pushes out these little flows. That one will seal up, it'll push out another one, and so these flows become kind of radial to the pond. So far there's been no ultimate advance of the flow itself, so no organized advance, it's just these radial things. And this pond took a while to develop, so there was some advancement of the flow last night, but it simply was the initial laying of the ground for the perch pond that now exists.
And what's holding that pond in? The perch pond, I don't understand. Maybe you could explain.
Well, the perch pond means that lava is put into this pond, and every once in a while it will overflow. But lava, not being water, it will solidify once it overflows, so it builds up that particular part of the rim, and over time that rim can get built up quite high. We've had perch ponds in Pu'u several times. And almost every time that Pu'u has collapsed and lava has come back, it's come back as first it fills the bottom, and then it starts perching a pond in there, and it could come up, several hundred feet with the bottom. So it's a very common mechanism. It's kind of fun to see over time. It's very slow, of course, but.
So, I guess the geology of that. The rims of that don't give way, or it just overflows. It's not necessarily they fall apart if there's a sudden surge in additional lava or anything that we've seen.
No, yeah, they'll overflow, which will then make the rim higher and make it more difficult for the next overflow, etc.
Okay.
Just to clarify, 22 total fissures and about a half a dozen active.
I've forgotten. I think it's 22, and we at least have 2 or 3 active at the same time. But 22 has been the champion for the last couple of days.
Jim, do you have an update on that big crack that formed yesterday? You know what I'm talking about? The one that started robbing the eastern lava flow?
You mean the one that goes into the ocean?
Yeah.
We didn't see it. We're because it's such a large flow. We don't have a good vantage point on the ground, so we can only see it from the air. And then we combine what the fireflights see and various airborne surveys being done out there. It must have happened overnight or perhaps very early this morning. But the overflight first thing in the morning at 6:30, the area was just too fummy to see much detail. So we know that it was already, that the western one was dead by 10 o'clock. And then we had the overflight at noon, and it was still dead. So, okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, guys. See you tomorrow at 3.